Good evening, everyone. I was just thinking to myself that there are certain phrases that we use in moments like this. We stand up to introduce somebody that are just, it's an honor, it's a privilege, we say this, but you know, it really is tonight. And I just wanted to stop and underline that as I introduce Devershi. And as I look around, I think all of you know him, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. As we were driving down from Davis today, we were just talking about different things and what each program that he's doing this weekend would be about. And I was just constantly saying to myself about him that it hardly matters in a way. Of course, he'll talk about his book because it's really monumental that this book came out. It's the first book like this on Kriya for the public through Ananda that's happened. And I have to say, I've not read it yet, but I have not heard anything but stellar reports. And it's wonderful that he'll be leading a Kriya Bond retreat tomorrow and giving Sunday service on Sunday. But the truth is that the most powerful part of all of this for all of us is just simply to be in and around his energy. Devarshi came to Ananda in the 70s and just been so deeply, deeply devoted to and living these teachings throughout all of these decades in just the most humble but clear way, such a devotee of Swamiji's and Masters. I remember once when he was talking about Kriya with us, and he said, I sat at his feet and I was listening. How does he do Kriya? And it just so perfectly describes him, just that exquisite, total attention to truth and to any vibration that would come his way, and yet with such great humility. So much of what he's here to teach us will not be in words, but rather in a much more subtle form if we get ourselves ready to receive that. He did lead the Kriya ministry around all of Northern America for many, many years. I don't know how many, but many, traveling all around. And then moved to India, where he helps guide the Kriya ministry, helps guide the whole teaching ministry there, and as most of us know, has really helped to has started really a monastery that he says is exactly how Swamiji envisioned monasteries. So really, what am I saying? His attunement, his devotion, his receptivity, all of these things that we know matter more than anything on the spiritual path is really what he's here to share with us. So it is, in fact, a great honor and a great privilege to be with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanti. And I'll share the real truth in a little bit, that I am nothing but our great masters can and are everything through us. But let's begin with a prayer and a chant. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswarji, beloved Guru, Paramhansa Yogananda ji, beloved friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda ji, saints of all religions, we bow with the deepest gratitude at your feet. Guide our lives through your grace, through these sacred teachings of Kriya Yoga and discipleship and attunement to thee. We are yours. Free us. Om. peace. Amen. I'll start this in the Indian way with an invocation to the Guru in Sanskrit. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandvatitam Gaganasatrisham Tattvamasyadilaksham Ekam Nityam Bimalachalam Sarvade Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tvam Namami Tvameva Mata Chapita Tvameva Tvameva Mandu Chasaka Tvameva Tvameva Vidya Dravinam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Words to this chant are Sri Yogananda, guide to inner freedom, steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Sri Yogananda, guide to inner freedom, steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Sri Yogananda, guide to inner freedom, steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Sri Yogananda, guide to inner guide to inner freedom. Steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Steal into my heart of hearts, banish my delusions. Let's meditate for 5 minutes or so, offering the love of our hearts, lifting it and giving it up to God, to the Guru, to the Divine Mother, at the point between the eyebrows, making it a complete offering of our love, of our entire being. I look like I'm going to be stepping and falling off of this ledge here. Someone catch me. I just want to thank everyone for coming this evening, so many dear friends, and interested in learning more about Kriya Yoga or going deeper into the path of Kriya Yoga and into the life of Kriya Yoga. And this book is something that was a challenge for me to write, and even though I've been guiding the Kriya Sangha in the US and in the world for over 20 years. And you'd think it would be the easiest book to write, but there were so many possible ways to write it. And in a way, I didn't choose to write it. I was asked to write it. It was like a big homework assignment to write a book. Jyotish Devi, the directors of Ananda worldwide, asked me to write this book about 5 years ago. And early on, I realized I couldn't just write a 150-page brochure about Kriya Yoga for brand new people who might be interested in it. It had to be something that came from my own inspiration and depth and breadth of the understanding, because it's so much more than what people think. And I think, well, even all of us, because I think for those of us who are avid about it, we're always learning something new, and whether it's the practice of the technique or in how to live our lives as Kriya Yogis, and to bring the principles of Kriya Yoga into our daily lives and into dealing with all the stuff that we have to deal with. And so the book ended up being more about that. And because it's for the general public, I wasn't even going to talk about the technique of Kriya Yoga. But I'll talk briefly about it, because people think that Kriya Yoga is just a technique. And so, okay, I can go online and learn it now, and who needs a guru, a teacher? It's just this breathing exercise. And Swami Kriyananda once said that when people reduce it to just a breathing exercises, he said it's just huffing and puffing is all it is. And he also said that often that Kriya is not mechanical in giving the results that it gives, that it takes all these other aspects of the life of a Kriya Yogi: devotion, especially the guru, attunement to the guru, and the art of it. And so the art and science is really the thread that runs through the whole book. Yes, it does talk about the science, and it also talks about the art, and they're not separate. They're actually tied together every step of the way. And because you can't practice the technique just mechanically, that means practicing it with art. At a Kriya initiation, Swami Kriyananda once said that the most important part of this technique, I can't teach you. And I thought, oh no. I mean, is there some secret place where they teach the rest of it? And he said, no, the art, which is the most important part of a practice, you can't teach it. You have to tune into it. You have to learn it through magnetism, through being around other people who understand it and sort of intuiting it from them. And this is the art of Kriya. And this, in the end, this is our aspiration to know God, to love God. This is really why Yogananda even brought this practice of Kriya. I'll read just a couple little parts of it. But Yogananda was asked if this teaching of Kriya Yoga and what we do was a new religion. And he said it's a new expression of truths that are eternal. And it gets basically to the very core of who and what we are universally. But he said that you are on the eve of a great spiritual awakening, a great change in the churches, where true souls will be drawn to seek the experience of God's presence. And that's really what the purpose of Kriya Yoga is, to actually have contact with God in our own hearts, with our higher self, with the universe. And the soul will not be happy, we will not be happy until we have that contact. And so techniques, they might be interesting for a while, and this is why people give up when they learn Kriya Yoga. Often they practice the technique, and I have a friend in India who has said with much chagrin that when he learned Kriya, he just said, is this all it is? I could have gotten it from a book or from the internet. But then over time he understood that it's so much more than that. When Yogananda was a boy, he would meditate with the great Baduri Mahashaya, called the Levitating Saint, an autobiography of a yogi. And once they were meditating, and they meditated for an hour or more, and afterwards he scolded young Mukunda, this great saint, and he said, you often go into the silence, but are you practicing anubhav, which is the direct perception of God? He said, don't mistake the techniques for the goal. And so Kriya, the technique, people lose sight of it, and they think it's the goal. And even Kriya Yogis, we get very technical oriented. We have so many techniques. And so the art of it is really the part that makes it come alive and really makes it work. Yet it is a technique. There's a chapter in this book titled The Technological Yogi. And it sounds like, come on, the technological yogi, where did you ever come up with that? And well, you want to know where I came up with it? From Autobiography of a Yogi. Yogananda uses that exact phrase, the technological yogi. And it's in reference to the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna talks about the yogi practicing yoga meditation with this intense yearning and self-offering and desire for God. And so when those two are brought together, there's an extraordinary power in that. When it's just one or the other, it's not the whole package. And so Yogananda, this is why he said, Kriya plus devotion works like mathematics. It cannot fail. And this is for Kriya Yogis, if you're really even the maths challenged ones, as they would say in India, that it's 1 + 1 = 2. Kriya, devotion. Kriya, love for God. Technique and devotion. Yogananda even once said, make love to God through techniques. And so you put them together. It's not you do the technique here and then you practice devotion. It's all one sort of integrated, very powerful thing. It's like the formula for dynamite or nitroglycerin or something. It's just, if you only have one part of the formula, it doesn't do anything. But when you put them together, there's just extraordinary power. And so this book is not just how to do the technique, and it really gets very little into that. It's more about how to live your whole life as a Kriya Yogi, and the depth and the breadth of it. Because people, including Kriya Yogis, lose sight of that or just don't understand just how completely life-changing it is. Swami Kriyananda said at a Kriya initiation that Kriya is a whole way of life, it's a whole approach to life. And that's a lot of what this book is about how to live in this world, because we meditate for 1 hour to 3 hours a day, and then what do we do the rest of the time? And the rest of the time is actually the part where we're tested, where we suffer, where we learn to grow, where we learn to give, to love, to feel betrayal and hurt and pain and grief and all the ups and downs of this life. And that's kind of where it's the learning ground. And Kriya is given to help us in every part of our lives. And so this is, again, the thread of Kriya Yoga is woven art and science through our entire lives, through everything that we do. And now is the time. The reason Yogananda said now is the time. The time for knowing God has come. The time for learning Kriya Yoga has come. It's this day and age. And as I think we all know, or most of us who've read Autobiography of a Yogi, when Babaji gave Lahiri Mahashai the technique of Kriya Yoga, this was in 1863 in the mountains of India. And the purpose of bringing that technique wasn't to give this guy a technique to find God in the mountains of India. It was to plant the seed that it would start growing and expanding. And it was really designed for those of us in the cities of India, in the cities of the United States. This is really why they brought this practice of Kriya Yoga, is to learn how to cope with this intense age of energy. And the book begins talking about how this is an age of energy. It's Dwapara Yuga is what our gurus teach. And it's an age of energy. It's an age of increasing energy, of chaotic energy. I mean, how often do you hear that it seems like the world is speeding up, everything's speeding up? And it is. I mean, the computers are speeding up, everything's speeding up, and it's like, oh my God, this world's going crazy. And they brought Kriya Yoga for this time, and for us in this exact situation. And it's not just learning to have more energy, it's about receiving more. You know, Swami Kriyananda talked a lot about how this is an age when we're more receptive to receiving energy. It's not just an age of more and more energy and hyper energy, and it's also an age of receiving energy and learning how to work with that energy. And if we learn how to work with it, I use the analogy in here, it's like a surfer learning to ride a wave. And you have to, if you're going to catch that wave, you have to swim and get up to the speed of the wave almost, maybe not quite, and then skillfully learn how to ride that wave. And that wave can be a very powerful wave taking us home to the shore very quickly. If we don't learn how to do that, we'll stand up in front of this great, glorious wave and it'll smash us down. You know, I've experienced getting smashed by a wave, so I know that there's a great power in it. And that's what this age of higher energy really is all about. It's just a much more intense time of energy, and we need to learn how to surf and ride that wave, or we're going to get wiped out by it. And so Kriya teaches us how we can do that, and it's very effective in that. And so when we can learn how to do that, then we can be a cause rather than an effect, rather than a victim of this wave and start complaining, oh, it's so unfair, this big wave knocked me down. And we can really tune into and receive that and learn how to work with it. But it's also a time of change in the churches. You know, Yogananda said there would be a revolution in the churches where I think he implied that people would be leaving the churches, and they are. When you read studies of the churches, it's because people have been experiencing churchianity, as Yogananda called it. You know, I quote in here, there's a comedian who once said that studies are showing that thousands and thousands are leaving the churches today and going back to God, is the way he put it. And that's sort of what's happening. And I think we all relate to that. We, fled from the traditional churches so that we could find God and find truth. And so I talk about that, and I think it's a universal thing for many people in this day and age. And so Kriya was given to experience and have direct perception of God that didn't require the intercession of a priest who you had to pay to say the mantras or to say the prayers and be the intermediary between you and God. And that's where the churches are not happy about that concept of the priest or the pujari kind of being put aside. And yeah, we still have a guru and a guide, but their purpose is to guide us on how to have that direct experience. And when we have that direct experience, then our lives change. And this is why, writing a book, it's a little bit of a joke because my name is on the title, but it's a little bit of a fraud, I should tell you that, because there was a lot of people who worked with the editing, with the book cover, but in the end, when I really struggled to find how to express these divine truths where Kriya yogis could learn from it, and someone who had never, or maybe was just learning about Kriya Yoga for the first time, could also gain something from it. And really, it was in the end just getting out of the way and allowing God and the gurus and our divine teachers for their wisdom to flow through us. And that's why I think my name shouldn't be on there, because it was only when I got out of the way, or maybe sometimes I think they slap us out of the way and say, come on, let me do it. And because sometimes it's hard to get out of their way. We have, willpower, we have energy, and we think we know how to do it, and I've learned how to write, and I can do this. And we're taught, yeah, I can do this, and even our wise school teachers say, you can do it, but we can when we cooperate with the divine. And so our part has to be to put out the energy, but to cooperate with grace. And that's a big theme in the book too, that really, and this is why Swami Kriyananda said, even about the Kriya technique, it's a quote, I think my favorite quote about Kriya, where Swamiji says, every Kriya should be an act of devotional self-offering. But then he says, and that's because only by divine grace do we really grow. But by offering ourselves with deepest devotion, with control, with power to God, we get into this flow of divine grace. In a way, we lift ourselves up into that place where there is divine grace. And so our part is to work at lifting ourselves up by offering ourselves. But the problem is that I shared in the story that I went to be a hermit in the mountains of California when I was younger, and I would go for weeks at a time. I'd save money, and I'd go for many weeks at a time up in the Sierras and just be by myself, living under the stars, just without a tent, just sleeping on the ground and not seeing people for many weeks, trying to be a hermit the best I could, and just meditating, walking every day and enjoying it. And it sounds like a very romantic spiritual lifestyle, and I'm sure we've all done it in past lifetimes. And just, I'll show you how romantic it was, but it still didn't work. One morning I woke up, and I had really, really long matted hair, and it was below freezing, and I was in a sleeping bag, and I didn't have a tent or anything, and it was very romantic, falling asleep, just gazing up into the infinite sky, endless stars. And it was a really cold night. The ground was frozen, and so only my head was out of the sleeping bag. But when I woke up, there was something or someone was pulling on my hair. And I hadn't seen anyone for days because I was in such a remote place. So it could only be animals. And I felt safe. It didn't feel like I was under any threat, and I just trusted what was going on. So I kind of poked my head out, and there was these two tiny birds. They weren't on my hair. They were inside my hair because it was just so wild. And they were just chirping and flitting around and having fun, playing. And so that was the romantic life of a hermit yogi in the mountains. And it sounds really good, and it was in a way. But what I found was that to do spiritual practices, part of the reason why I went up there was to leave all this distraction and to leave other people behind who I felt were only a distraction. I've learned otherwise since then. I've gotten a little bit wiser in that regard. But the problem was that this one person kept following me everywhere I went and chattering like those birds and talking and, restless and irritable sometimes. It was this fellow Devershi who was just hounding me everywhere. And I realized I needed a teaching, I needed a teacher. And then I found Yogananda and I found Ananda. And this is a great blessing to have a Sangha, a group like this who are striving together, because there's a real power and a real magnetism. And you've probably learned by now, it took me longer, that people are not just a distraction on the spiritual path, but they can be a real aid in helping us, but also in teaching us how to give, how to love, how to serve. And this is why we come together in this way. And Yogananda said, we didn't say get rid of all the churches. He said small groups would come together to meditate on their own, to meditate in groups in this higher age and this age of Dwapara Yuga. But it's a whole different understanding and approach to spirituality. And I'll read just something that Yogananda said, because we think of Dwapara Yuga as just this heightened energy. And in Silicon Valley, it's easy to relate to this heightened energy, and everything's more energetic and in so many ways. But there's also another aspect of Dwapara Yuga. And this is Swami Kriyananda. We have emerged from Kali Yuga, a male-dominated era when physical force seemed the only way of attaining one's objectives, and are already being swayed by the fresh spring breezes of Dwapara Yuga, the age of energy. There will be increasing awareness of the need for feminine inwardness as a balance to masculine outwardness, for inner inspiration as a balance to outward conquest, for feeling as the very essence of consciousness itself. In the struggle to adapt to these changes, it will be increasingly necessary to distinguish between calm feeling, which is intuitive, and the disruptive feelings of raw emotion. There is a need, now, today, to recognize the importance of inner peace as the soil in which alone the plant of true happiness can flourish. And Kriya Yoga shows us how, it gives us the power to be able to do that. We think of energy just as this impersonal power flowing through a wire, and sometimes Kriya yogis see it in the same way as this energy rising through the sushumna, the deep astral spine, as just prana, which it is, as just energy. But energy is the power of the universe. But Swami Kriyananda talks very often about how that energy in our consciousness is really based on divine feeling. And ever-new joy is God. That's who we're made of, that ever-new bliss. And he says also, and this is shared in this book, that we think of feeling as just something that binds us with emotion and emotional reaction and suffering and grief and pain and also the attraction of positive human emotions. And so yogis sometimes try to push that out of the way. But really, the goal of the Kriya Yogi is to learn to work with that feeling and to offer it up and transmute it into divine feeling, which is devotion, and which eventually, when we really contact the highest divine feeling, it is consciousness itself, is what Swamiji says. It is feeling. It's not this abstract idea. It's not a thought. And in a talk late in his life, he was giving an interview, and he said something that I think is sort of revolutionary in a way of just kind of changing our awareness of how we look at this idea of anubhav, direct perception of God, where Swamiji says God is feeling, which is, that statement is just, to me, that's like, what does that mean? And it's that important. And then he says, God is ever-new divine bliss, Satchit Ananda, and that's what we're made of. And God is not some unfeeling, abstract, impersonal thing, but it is impersonal in the sense of, it's not looking at us and looking at that person's beautiful blue eyes and liking them more or less or whatever. But that love is universal, impersonal, but it is divine love and that divine feeling of Satchitananda, divine bliss. And so how do we get control of our feelings and our emotions, our thoughts, all these things? And this is what Kriya Yoga does. That prana that we're trying to get control of, pranayam, be thy religion, which is control of the energy, that's also controlling our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our restless thoughts. And that's the bane, as we know, of every meditator. And I don't think I'm the only one. Am I, where you sit down to meditate and you're all of a sudden really, really, really restless, and it's difficult. And that restlessness comes from feeling, really, in the end, the feelings of the heart, the agitated feelings of the heart. And Kriya gives us the power to learn to control that, to learn to offer it and to transmute it into that divine feeling of devotion, of divine bliss. And it's a lifelong process of working with it and learning it. And this book kind of just really shows ways to try to understand this whole process in a different way and to use not just the technique of Kriya, which it does talk about this, but also just the principles and the control of the energy that Kriya gives us to help us overcome this littleness, this reactive process, which I talk about, and all the limitations that keep us from having that direct perception of God. And Kriya has the power to do that. It has the power to change us. I have to say that without exception, those I've seen who have done a lifelong practice of these things, not just as a technique, but as a way of life, that the changes are really extraordinary, miraculous even, of just overcoming every human limitation. And in the end, it comes through divine grace, as we've all been taught. But the whole process is cooperating and dancing with divine grace and serving others with feeling that it's God and the gurus flowing through us. It is meditating in them. Swami Kriyananda talked about don't pray to God only and don't meditate on God, but pray in God and meditate in God. And this is the flow of divine grace where we put ourselves really into that sphere where that grace is flowing. But it's also very practical. I was visiting a couple of dear friends, Dharmadas and Nirmala, today. And Dharmadas just had a very bad accident, but he's looking so amazingly, miraculously well for those who know him. And they reminded me of a story I told in the book, and they wanted to know more about it. But it shows how practical Kriya Yoga is. Lahiri Mahashaya, when his disciples would come to him with problems, he would say, practice Kriya Yoga, practice meditation, and those problems will be solved. And it doesn't get solved in some sort of, woo-woo, hocus-pocus kind of a way where we have a problem, we meditate, and all of a sudden we come out of our meditation room and the problem's gone. What it does is it helps us to deal with our problems and solve them, but even mundane ones. And I share a mundane, practical problem because, let's face it, we're all, I think in this room, we're practical people, meaning what we are trying to do with these practices is to change our life in very real ways. And the science of Kriya, in many ways, is a practical science, meaning that it's something that helps us in certain ways in our lives, in very practical ways too, not just in sort of cosmic ways. And I share the story where I was working on Swami Kriyananda's staff when the Crystal Hermitage, the area around his home, was being built. And all the workers, the plumbers, electricians, and everybody had finished the project and had all gone. And as with any big project like that, there's still a lot of problems left, things that just were not solved or not totally fixed, waiting some part or something. And I was left to deal with all those. And one of them was this noise that was being made by the pipes, like every 30 to 45 seconds, all day long, and only during the day, not at night. And it was a big boom throughout where Swami Kriyananda was writing and working, and it was amazingly distracting. And he kept coming to me and asking me, so is it fixed yet? And I called plumbers, electricians, and they looked at it, they tried a few things, and they just couldn't figure it out. And I guess it wasn't a straightforward problem. And Swamiji kept coming to me, okay, you're supposed to fix this? And one day I was meditating, and I had no idea. No one had any idea, and I wasn't like a plumber or an expert. And so one day I was meditating, and I was doing Kriya Yoga, and I wasn't thinking about the problem. I was really practicing the best I could, and I felt some inspiration and joy. I was having a good meditation, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, unasked, the solution to this problem came to me. And it was a very strange problem and a very strange solution. And a plumber probably was never going to find it because, we all know that a lot of our problems, they're not in the index of the book. We can't find it and solve our problems that way. We have to use our intuition, which is what meditation and Kriya gives us. And that was the solution to the problem, was just that. It was just a very simple thing, and it solved it. And so even plumbing problems can be solved through Kriya Yoga. And we laugh, but all of our problems in life, if we practice in the right way, we learn how to deal with all of the stuff that we have to work with. And it's not just dealing with outward practical stuff, because we talk often about, Kriya Yoga helps with business and with science and with art and all these things. But where it really helps is with this stuff that we have to deal with every day. And we have to deal with our emotions, and I talk about this in the book about dealing with the loss of a loved one and dealing with grief, with chronic pain, with a lot of different issues that we have that are not out there, they're in here. And Kriya Yoga can help us overcome all those things too, especially because when those things are fixed, and it's not like we hammer the problem away or medicate it away or suppress it. What we do is by offering the heart's feelings during Kriya practice with devotion and in attunement with divine grace, what happens is that those problems become transmuted into something much higher. And this is what I found. I share this story when I lost my wife of 25 years. I think some of you knew her. Yeah, all the philosophy, the books, all the different parts of the books about dealing with the loss of a loved one, it didn't really help me. I mean, maybe intellectually, but the human heart failed to keep up with all this grandiose philosophy. And I had to deal with it. And I learned that rather than pushing it away, or as one well-meaning friend said, oh, in a year or so you'll be moving on from it, and maybe. But I found that rather than trying to ignore it or recalibrate in some other way, by consciously offering that loss, that grief, in meditation, in prayer, it transmuted it. It turned that into something much higher. And this is kind of what really, and I'll just finish like this and then maybe take some questions. In India, there's a practice, and I think you probably do it here sometime, it's called puja, where you offer different items, incense, water, food, sweets, you offer them to the altar. And when you offer them to the altar, to God, with prayer, with devotion, these things become holy. Food becomes prasad, it becomes holy, sacred food, by offering it to God with deep devotion. And this really, in the end, is how Kriya really, really works, is that by offering ourselves with complete devotional self-offering during Kriya, but also in our lives, in learning to give to others in service, in love and kindness, that it's a puja in a way, where we are offering our entire beings on the altar of spirit in the spine, and our entire beings become sanctified. And this is how people become saints. It's not, I see that, you say so-and-so is a saint, and it's not that they're a saint, it's more that their human littleness and issues and things have, through lifetimes, but through this lifetime, through service, through devotional offering, everything that we are becomes sanctified by offering it on the altar, and it becomes transmuted. And this is this beautiful chant that Yogananda would sing, touch me but once and I will change all my clay into thy gold. And this is the alchemy, really, of what Kriya Yoga does. It changes our clay into gold. And even the funkiest clay, I think Yogananda, whoever wrote the chant, used the word clay because they wanted to be polite and not use other words that they could have used. But Kriya Yoga can do that, and for everyone. It's just a scientific process that's been proven. Again, there's also the art of it. But when we practice in these ways that we're talking about, and this book really talks about, really, which is what I think the greatest benefit of this book is that it shows us how to do this and how to be patient with ourselves, how to get back on track when we fall away, how to work with those emotional feelings, with a reactive process when things happen to us and we react emotionally. And over time, this is what happens. Every act that we do that's selfless, that's given to God, it is part of that process of turning clay into gold. Until there's no clay left, there's only gold. And that's why when you say so-and-so is a saint, it's more like so-and-so got themselves out of the way and they transmuted and turned all the human parts into something divine, and they're no longer there. And you could see this in Swami Kriyananda near the end of his life, where it was almost like he was transparent. It was like there was no Swami Kriyananda there anymore. It was just this divine light that was there, and just this pure, almost childlike at times, joy, sweetness that just had no sort of human contraction or littleness or human emotion, and just the light of God flowing through, where there was no Kriyananda anymore. And this is even Yogananda, he said, Master, he said, I killed Yogananda long ago. No one lives in this temple now but God. And so that's why it's a little bit to point to them and say, oh, that person's a saint. It's not that person's a saint, it's that person got out of the way and allowed the pure light of God to come through. And this really is how Kriya Yoga can and will change those, and we all see it. I mean, this is the beauty of living at Ananda Village for many years, since the 1970s, and being around people who have been doing Kriya Yoga for almost 50 years now. You see it. You really, really see it. You see before Kriya Yoga, you see after Kriya Yoga. You see before learning Kriya Yoga, you see what happens after 10, 20, 30, 40 years of Kriya Yoga. And it's universal, I have to say. The benefits, if you do it in the right way, are universal. Before Kriya and after Kriya, it's really night and day. I half joke, but it's actually true. My last photograph before Kriya Yoga was my mug shot taken by the California Department of Corrections. And after Kriya Yoga is really different from that picture, I have to say. And it's probably not that dramatic with everybody, but it really is. It really, really is. And this is the power of this practice of Kriya Yoga when done in the way that they gave us, with, again, both art and science, and working with all these different processes of divine grace especially. So any questions that people have? I think there's a microphone to pass around. And this book is also really helpful for people who aren't Kriya Yoga, yogis. So I would say everyone who buys a book, buy two, to give one away to someone, a family person or a friend who might want to learn more about Kriya Yoga.
Hi, I read the part about the pipes.
Uh-huh.
And, well, I have a situation with my next door neighbor. She has pipes that make noise when the water's turned on. And so I didn't know, I mean, I know this is not, this is like a mundane question. But is there an easy solution to that noise?
Yeah, do Kriya Yoga. But you know, what I've seen is that it's not always like the light bulb goes on necessarily and an answer comes, but somehow when we get into that flow of divine grace, somehow we start saying the right things, we start doing the right things, and just, even offer that up in prayer. Try that even. Just, maybe you won't hear it, maybe, yeah. Maybe God will trick you and hide the sound from you or something, but, when we have problems, this is what I've seen, and I've found it really helpful. When there's problems, turn to God, even if it's just a really trivial problem, like pipes making noises. Go to Divine Mother and complain. What are you doing? I'm your child, and you're making all this noise, and, what's wrong with you? Why'd you create this like this? And what that does is it starts turning our mind towards God more and more. And I think, I know from my own experience that when we take our problems to God, even mundane ones, even complaining problems like that it changes us. And maybe what happens is that it's not about what we think, which is that the problem's supposed to be taken away, but maybe we change by that process, and we change so much that we're not bothered by that thing anymore. We don't react in our hearts to that thing, that issue. And I went through this where I realized that, we hear about having your buttons pushed. And yeah, there was someone in my life who was pushing my buttons. And I realized that the problem wasn't them. The problem was that I have buttons. And I had to get rid of my buttons, really, in a way. And if we don't have buttons, then we're not going to be pushed by that. And so work on changing ourselves, not from a sense of guilt. Oh, God, that problem is causing me issues, and it's my fault. And, that's not the response. But just, I don't know, if we keep going back to God, our buttons start kind of popping and falling off one by one, I think, is what can happen. So there's a lot of different ways it works, but yeah.
I think, well, I better not ask.
Thank you, first of all, for writing this. I read it, and it's so many things to share, but I will specifically come to my point. Okay. First of all, a few comments, if you will allow me. Mm-hmm. It's written very, very nicely. It's a very subtle signature of God. The quotes that you have chosen, all of us have read the AY. All of us have read the book, the books from which you took Swami's quotes. But the beautiful way which Master and Swami flow through every chapter, there is a certain sequencing. Yeah. Love that.
Thank you. I enjoyed that too. It was very important, actually, part of that book.
Yeah, you can tell a lion bites claw.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. So just amazing. Just the quotes alone. If you the second part was like the stories, the way you lightly. Some people can make a whole lifetime by one of your stories, but the way you tell your stories is just, again, loosely held, strong, intense, emotional stories, but very loosely held and very deftly handled. So
yeah,
again,
and really, I tell a lot of personal stories and experiences, and they're not really, I mean, they're my stories, but they're everyone's story in a way, and they're really not about what I went through, but what we're all going through in dealing with, whether it's emotions or problems or questions or doubts or these things. So, yeah.
Very reassuring too, like your travel in India, asking Divine Mother, is this fair? And Divine Mother's answer, somehow I felt that was very reassuring, even though I don't have Divine Mother's direct contact. Your contact is mine by reading through the book. But my only question was like your story of Karna, like I'm talking about that. That was a very interesting story because I grew up in India. In India, nothing is singular. Everything is plural, as you know.
Right.
300 versions of the Mahabharata. But I found that deeply, deeply resonating. I've never read that version. And when you were gone on the waves, that particular point where you just say, I am yours, Lord, and the Lord pushes you back. That story and Karna's story, which I've never heard, is deeply. Where did you get that story from? That's all. That was my question.
So that version of that story is from a good friend of many of us, Vanamali Devi, who's wrote a book on the lives of Krishna, and she says it's from the original Puranas, and so she went to the original texts, and she tells that story of Karna in that way, and it's a beautiful story. It just maybe I'll just share it here because it really speaks to what we really have to do, because we think that we have to, quote, work out our karma and work out all our karma. And we don't. That's a real confusion. And Yogananda said that the goal is to become, of life, is to become a jivan mukta, one who is freed while living. But as Swami Kriyananda would often point out, that a jivan mukta still has karma, but they're inwardly free and they're not creating new karma. And when that old karma comes, they're not touched by it because there's no post of ego to tie it to anymore. And the yogi is untouched by sorrow, pain, all the ups and downs. But Karna was, a character in the great Mahabharata, and I won't tell the whole backstory because it's kind of long and complicated. But in the Mahabharata, Arjuna was battling against, and the Pandavas were battling against the bad guys, the Kauravas. And Karna was one of them. And he was a half-brother to Arjuna and the Pandavas. So he really was a divine being as much as them in a way. But he kind of fell in with the wrong crowd in the terms of the Kauravas. And he had great spiritual power. And Arjuna was battling him. And he used all these weapons. And finally Krishna, who was Arjuna's charioteer, said, you can't kill Karna because he has too much spiritual merit and too much spiritual power. And he has to lose all that spiritual merit and all that power before you can kill him. And so Krishna disguised himself as a beggar and went seeking alms to Karna and asked him for alms. And Karna didn't have anything to give him. I don't tell the whole story in there, but he tears off his armor, which was actually part of his body. It was embedded in his body from birth, and he tears it off and gives it to Krishna. And Krishna says, as a beggar, as a sadhu seeking alms, and he says, well, that's not enough. You have to give me more. And Karna says, I don't have any more. I don't have anything else to give. And Krishna says, give me all of your spiritual merit, all your spiritual karma, good karma, from past, all that you are earning now, and all that you will earn in the future. Which, if someone asked us that, it would be like, oh my God, that's the most valuable thing I have. And Karna was very dharmic in the sense of he was magnanimous, and he had this quality that if anyone asked him for anything, he would give it. And that's kind of why he got in with the wrong crowd, because the bad guys asked him to help them. And so he said, yes, I give you all of my spiritual merit I've ever gotten in the past, all that I'm getting now, and all that I will be earning, I give to you. And I think Karna knew this was the Lord come to him. And then and Karna was riddled with arrows at that point. And when he lost all his karma, spiritual merit, he passed out. And he woke up at a certain point because he felt raindrops falling on him. And those raindrops, when he opened his eyes, was Krishna weeping tears of just joy and blessing onto Karna for his generosity and his magnanimity. And he told Karna, he said, "You've gotten great merit." And he appeared at that point to Karna as the Lord of the universe. And he said, "You've gotten great blessing for this, and I will give you a boon, for what you have done." And he said, "I'll give you whatever you ask, anything." And think about that. If God came to us and said, "I'll give you anything that you want, anything that you ask," what would we ask for? I mean, this is a serious question, because it's kind of like, are we going to pass and become free, or are we going to become more bound by what we ask? And Karna, he passed the exam with flying colors, because his answer was something that you would not think. He said to Krishna, he said, "The only thing I ask is that in my next lifetime," because he knew he had karma, he said, "in my next lifetime, I only pray and ask that I be as magnanimous and generous in that lifetime as I am in this lifetime, and that I give to whoever asks, and that I basically am just give and give and give." And that's a good answer. In fact, it's the highest answer. And Krishna said to him, "Because of that, because of what you have asked, you are free. You don't have to reincarnate, and you don't have to be born again." And so the way out of bondage to karma and reincarnation isn't to, quote, work out our karma, is to free the bondage of the ego. And the way to do that is to give ourselves to God, to give ourselves in meditation, and to meditate. I suggest this for Kriya Yogis and for people who meditate. We ask for God a lot. We pray to God, and every meditation, maybe we ask for something of God. But spend a week of meditation, maybe the next week, where you don't ask of anything from God. You only ask to give more, and give yourself to God in prayer, devotion, in meditation, and only think in terms of just what you can give rather than what's in it for me, because that's where you realize this is where the answer is. Because if we're always praying to God and asking God, me, give me this, give me that, it's kind of like that child who is constantly nagging its mother for this, that, and the other thing, and the other child is she's helping the mother. She's serving the mother. She's helping the other children on behalf of the mother. And that child who does that is free in that act, and is free in that moment. And the one who's always asking never becomes free until they learn just how to give and how to love and how to serve without any thought of self. And yeah, it's not wrong to pray to God, but just try this experiment of spending a week where all you do is, what can I give you, Lord? And I give you my love, and I give you my devotion. And I tell a story in the book where I was dealing with a chronic pain, which is of the facial nerve, which trigeminal neuralgia is what it's called. And it was overwhelming. The pain was intense, and the doctors weren't much help. Neurologists implied that I would have it for the rest of my life. And, I would get dizzy and nauseous. It was so sort of intense, and it was very debilitating. I couldn't even sit up and meditate when it was really bad. And so there was fear, like, oh my God, what's my life going to be like if I have to deal with this? And, people are going to have to take care of me, and can I even handle this kind of pain for the rest of my life? And so, yeah, fear came in. And at a certain point, I think God brings us to our knees and just smashes us and brings us to our knees, and there's no hope. And all we can do is turn to God. And that's what I did. I prayed to God as Divine Mother. And, I follow Swami Kriyananda's practice of not praying for healing or anything for myself. But what I did was I just gave myself to God at Divine Mother's feet and said, I'm yours, and I love you unconditionally, and I give myself to you. And, I complained also. I said, look at how you're treating this child, Mother. Come on, you can do better than that. But it was done with love, and it wasn't done out of a sense of pain or hurt. It was just, and in that complete giving, when the giving really became complete, then the pain was still there, but it went into the background, and bliss came to the foreground. And it didn't fix the pain, but it fixed me, because I was no longer reacting and really suffering. Pain was there, but I wasn't suffering because the bliss came to the fore. For those of you who use Photoshop, that program, I've used it for decades. And you can take two images that are sort of combined, and you can bring one to front and move the other one to the back, or vice versa. And what it did was it just moved the pain to the back, and it moved the bliss of God, which is always there. It's who we are, and it moved it to the front. And so we don't have to fix the karma. We just have to fix the person who's experiencing the karma, which is us. And the way out of that is self-offering and giving. And when we really perfect that, we enter this grace of God, and there's no one there left to feel the pain and to suffer, because we've merged into God and we become much greater than this tiny, contractive little self. And so this is the way out, is to give and to think of serving others, even when we're going through our own pain. Now, I'll share one more story that applies to this that's in the book, where I was, one night many years ago, I was experiencing a lot of pain in my side, and it was getting worse and worse over a few days, and it was finally really intense. And my wife, Maria, she said, you have to go to the emergency room, and they have to figure this out. And so it was midnight on Saturday. And if you've ever been to an emergency room at midnight on a Saturday in California, it's a scene. And it's probably their peak time with shootings and overdoses and accidents and all that. And that's what it was like. And so they brought me into a room where all these other people were suffering and doing things. And it was all I could do was curl up into the fetal position. It was just so painful and such a sharp pain. And I realized one thing is that for yogis, it's not the pain that hurts, it's the contractive feeling of just contracting in on ourselves, I realized later. But then as I was lying there, there was a young man who was unconscious, and he had a drug overdose. He was probably just a teenager. And his girlfriend was there, and she was pleading with him, please don't go, don't go. And obviously their suffering was way more than mine, and my heart went out, and I began praying for her that she'd be able to cope with whatever God gave her, and I prayed for him. Divine Mother, at least give him another chance. And when I began praying for others, my pain went away. It literally went away. The pain was completely gone. And I just felt this joy and freedom. And the problem didn't go away, because they found out that it was my gallbladder, and the gallbladder had to be removed. But the pain and the suffering went away. And so this is where, maybe the karma is still there, but it doesn't bother us anymore. And in fact, for me, I share in the book, it was a really good deal. My gallbladder, in exchange for a really good lesson, that was a life lesson for learning how to overcome our own problems, is by praying for others and giving to others, giving ourselves at the feet of God in meditation, if that's all we can do. So it's about giving, and then the karma just, Master said, this is why he said about becoming a Jivan Mukta. He said, people complain about karma, karma, karma. And he said, let God worry about your karma. Our part is just to give ourselves to God in devotion and in prayer. And God will take care of the karmas and the problems in our lives when we can do that. So any other questions?
Am I audible?
Yep.
Yes. There is a PDF copy also we can buy. So I bought your book.
Yep.
It's very wonderful. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So my question is that when people go through difficult times, and part of that is a confusion that sets in. So what is a good way to figure out that how to remain steadfast in the practice, and pain and confusion, if you want to say something about it.
And really, that's just a karma. where some action in the past has planted a seed of karma, vritti, that causes us to feel confusion or doubt. Maybe we've doubted in the past, or maybe we caused somebody else to be confused or full of doubt in the past, whatever. And what I've learned from experience, and it does take some experience, is just to trust that whatever comes to me, that God will also give me the strength to overcome it. And that trust is tested a lot, and it's always tested, I think, and until we become completely free in them. And that for me has been a mantra in many recent years, is just that word trust, of just to trust in God and trust in the Guru, that what comes to us is being given to help us, at least for those who have given their lives to wanting to be free and asking them to help us to become free. And that even the problems are given by them, I've seen, to help us become free. And sometimes it's to learn a quality. And so to ask, okay, what do I need to learn here? Because sometimes people get into this whole thing about karma, where karma comes and they go running around as psychic readers and past life readers and finding that 10 lifetimes ago they kicked someone or something like that, and but it doesn't really answer the question of what do I need to learn and change. And so I like to go back to that of just, okay, what is this test trying to teach me? But also praying to God and to the Guru, okay, give me the strength to get through it and to understand and learn. But I find that developing a particular quality, sometimes it's trust, sometimes it's patience, it's perseverance, it's selflessness, it's compassion for others suffering, all these different things. But just try to tune into what quality God is trying to teach me, because it is a school in that regard. And it seems sometimes the confusion or doubt comes because, it seems cruel and unfeeling of God to be doing these things to us. But I share a lot in the book about that, about just how Divine Mother gives each one exactly what they need, as strange as it seems. But I've seen in hindsight that, yes, even I'd have to say in hindsight, my biggest tests have also been my greatest blessings, because it taught me lessons that were really invaluable. But that comes with experience at times, and I think also just from being around others who are doing it helps with that. And that's why the power of others doing these things is really, I think it's invaluable, I really do. Because, you can always find someone who's strong at that moment and can help us. And sometimes it's just that strength is all we need, is just to keep going and getting through that karma. Because karma is finite. It has a beginning, it has an end. And sometimes it takes time sometimes to work through it. And so a lot of it is developing these qualities that are needed to find God. And sometimes it's just perseverance if it takes time. And sometimes it's trust. Sometimes it's inner strength. Sometimes it's learning that pain, we can be free from it and go within. But just try to find what it is that we're trying to learn. And that's where confusion and doubt comes in, because we think that we're not strong enough. We wonder why this is happening. We doubt in God. Why is this happening? Why are you doing this to me? Or why are you allowing this to happen? But time, support, patience, learning. But it's not an easy answer. Unfortunately, these problems, you just don't look it up in the index of the book and turn to page 27. Oh yeah, that's what I do, and get rid of the problem. We have to try to intuit and work with it. Does that answer your question?
Will you release an audiobook?
Yes. Thank you for asking. He asked if there will be an audiobook. And when I was at Ananda Village, I just finished recording the audiobook just about, a week or 2 weeks ago. So there will be an audiobook. It needs to go through the editing process and the sound person, and they have another book that they're working in the queue. But sometime in a month or maybe 2 months, there will be an audiobook available.
The passion story of Jesus is about the great master confronting a corrupt priesthood. And the irony is that over the next 300 or 400 years, the ruling powers of Rome adopted Christianity, which then was subject to the decay that causes a corrupt priesthood. And as I hear us use the word churchianity, it hurts my heart a little bit because it feels to me like a projection that I wouldn't like to have projected toward me. And I'm a little bit sensitive to that because right now I'm doing some pretty intense journaling around some shadow work that I need to clear up. And so when I hear this word, I'm just tossed out as if it's a common understanding. I don't quite get why there's so much dissonance in me that arises, although it may be that I have recently accepted a ministry in another church as the organizer of a small group of people who read the Gospels every week publicly, who proclaim the Gospels. But I was wondering how you understand the word churchianity.
Yeah, and it's a good question. We're a church. Ananda is a church. And so Yogananda wasn't saying that all churches are bad, but churchianity, which is, and this is part of what I get into in the book, is that one of the aspects of coming into an age of Dwapara Yuga is that those churches who are seeking power for themselves as a church, as institutionalism, they'll start to decline because people, and they are starting to decline, those churches that put the needs of the people they're serving first, rather than the power of the church or all that those churches who are really serving people spiritually will thrive and grow. And so it is sort of a breaking point in history in some ways that we're going through now. And this is why a lot of churches, especially the old dogmatic, very extreme fundamentalist churches, whether it's, you see this in Islam, you see this in Christianity, you see this in Hinduism, they're fighting for dear life and even using violence to try to keep their old ways strong. And those will dissolve during this time, this age of energy, according to Yogananda. And that's what we're seeing. And we are seeing smaller churches coming up, newer approaches that come from compassion for others. And this is the true type of religion that Yogananda said people would be seeking during this age, where they have the experience of God as compassion, kindness, as love, as, and as direct experience, and being given the guidance and the power to go home and experience themselves, rather than just only going through a priest, although teachers and guides are also important, but to give us the direct experience. And so that's how Yogananda was talking about it. It wasn't throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It was just trying to point out the differences and really, I think, what to look for in this new age. Because you see things dissolving right now with a lot of churches, with corrupt priesthood, for example, and just what it's doing to some of the biggest churches in the world, East and West. And I think it's the light of God is also coming right now to shine a light on that so that it can't be avoided anymore, dealing with it. And so, yeah, and during that time, it's a rough time. This transition time is very rough because there's just a lot of strife in the world. And you see this in politics too, where, countries that are trying to hold on and have not been serving humanity, but trying just to have power, they're now holding on for dear life and trying to put out even more power. And luckily, as I say in the book, that it looks like it's going to be a rough time, and you really wonder how the story's going to end when you read the news and such. But Dwapara Yuga will have the final word, because we're in an ascending arc of enlightenment and more light coming to the earth. And so those churches who are practicing or preaching churchianity or institutionalism and just trying to hold on to power or be powerful, they're going to dissolve away naturally, but not without a fight. And those who are serving others and wanting to help others and inspire others with their own divine nature, they will thrive and they will grow. So that's the difference. That's how, for me, it's not, black and white. It's, in a way it is, but more, on a spiritual level. And so, yeah, churches can serve people. And that's, here we are, right here, and it sounds like what you're doing too. So, does that help answer your question? Okay.
You mentioned in your book roaming the forest when you were a child. I was wondering if you had any more fun stories to share about that, or simply your connection with nature.
I talk in the book about spending time. I grew up next to a huge forest. Almost right outside my back door, there was a forest that went for miles. And my twin brother and I, who some of you may have met him, maybe not, he's also a Kriya Yogi. And he's a monk in Self-Realization Fellowship, is where he practices Kriya Yoga. And we spent a lot of time roaming the forests. And when school began in kindergarten, we actually told our parents we're not going. We're not doing the school thing, and we didn't for some time, actually. It may have been a week or 2 weeks, but finally we realized that, okay, there's probably no way to avoid this, and we ended up going to school. But I think from a young age, we realized that this world was not, the normal mainstream world was not ours. And that's probably why I ended up in a place like this with people like you guys here. But it's just, I think for most of us, when we wake up, we realize, oh my God, this is not my home. Because we get this idea that, this is our home, and we start getting used to it, and maybe we start making it comfortable enough that, okay, I can deal with this, and I can figure it out, and it's not that bad, but just try to not have that thought and give in to that thought, and try to aspire for something much higher, because this is how this world tricks us. It just tricks us into thinking, I can. If I earn enough money and make things really nice, I can deal with this pretty good and fix this problem with my skill at, solving problems, and then I can solve other problems, and then I can solve all my problems that way. My wife, Maria, when she had cancer and it had gone to her brain, and she knew that she only had a few weeks to live, and she gave a talk, a Sunday service when we were traveling, and the analogy she used is that we get this idea that, if I can just end up finding the perfect cup of coffee at the perfect coffee shop and they make it just right, if I can solve that, then I can solve this other problem in my life and all my problems in my life, just because I'm really good at solving problems. But Yogananda said that in the end, we can't do it that way. There's always going to be one more. And Swami Kriyananda talks about washing a shirt in a tub of water, and there's air bubbles in there, and you push down one side, and it pops up in another side. And this world tricks us into thinking that we can somehow find happiness and just make it at least good enough that we don't suffer, but just don't settle for anything but divine perfection, because this world can lull us into sort of a sleep by making things just good enough. And it's easier, or it's harder when we live in a place where there's so much prosperity and we can fix a lot of things in our lives. But use that opportunity to be able to do what we're all doing, giving, serving, meditating, and seeking truth. Because that's really, in the end, what's really only going to help us to be happy. So. I did learn how to meditate in that forest as a young child. We used to fish in the creek, and yet you put this little plastic bobber, it was called, and there'd be a worm hanging from it, and you had to watch it really closely until it started moving and making waves, and you would just sit for a really long time, really still, just watching and patiently waiting. And we did learn how to be still by doing that. There were some good lessons there. Nature teaches very good lessons. Any other questions? Happy birthday, Keshava. Okay.
Then I think we'll move on. We'll have an opportunity now for anyone who wants to have their books signed by Devershi. We'll just take a moment to rearrange up here. We have a few books left for purchase, and I know most of you brought your books with you, but we'll rearrange that in just a moment.
Okay.